She stumbled along the broken fence, skirt snagged on splintered boards, eyes hollow and desperate. Dust clung to her hair, and her hands shook with hunger. Please, anything. Bread, water, her voice cracked like dry wood. The wind carried it over the cattle grazing lazily in the distance, but no one came. Not at first. Then a rough shout from behind. You're not welcome here. Move along. She spun, clutching her thin shawl tighter, and saw a man leaning on a rail, ice hard as flint. I haven't eaten in days. My children, her voice faltered. He snorted. We don't care. Get off the land. She swallowed a sob, her hands clenching to nothing. Behind him, the wide ranch stretched, a low wooden barn sagging at the edges. The smell of hay and sweat and sun-baked earth filled her nose. Somewhere in the shadows, someone watched. Silent. Still. Unmoving. I'm not leaving, she whispered, more to herself than to the man. He spat on the ground and waved a hand. You should. Before someone else sees you. She took a step forward, barefoot brushing the warm dirt, knees weak. I only need a bite. A sip. He laughed, low and cruel. This land isn't for beggars. Her stomach twisted. A week without food and she could feel herself fading. She looked past him. There, leaning against a tree, a figure barely visible under the moonlight. An Apache scout. Silent. Watching. Waiting. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but not cruel. He did not move. She didn't understand why he watched. She didn't care. She only wanted to survive. Her voice rose, urgent. Please. I won't be trouble. Just something to eat. The man's jaw tightened, but his eyes flicked toward the scout, unease flitting across his face. I said. The man stopped. Silence. The scout took a step forward, just enough to be seen, and the man faltered. She noticed it then, the calm certainty in the scout's posture, the slow, deliberate movements. She thought maybe, just maybe, this stranger might not let them turn her away. She swallowed her fear and took another step. The man backed up, unsure, muttering under his breath. Damn Apache. She didn't understand, but she stayed close to the fence, hoping. The scout said nothing. He simply lifted a hand, fingers curling toward the ground, beckoning her. She hesitated, heart hammering. Are you going to? He tilted his head slightly. That was enough. She stepped toward him. He moved aside, and she followed, moving past the man who had threatened her. He spat again, muttering curses, but she didn't look back. Not once. Relief burned along her nerves as they walked toward a gap in the fence. Her knees almost buckled, but he steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. No words. Just the weight of silent protection. They stopped near a low mound of earth and old timber. The scout crouched by it, inspecting the ground. She watched him, breathing uneven, trying to memorize every shadow. Why are you helping me? She whispered. No answer. He merely motioned toward the mound. Shelter, she guessed. His eyes flicked to hers once, unblinking. A slow, almost imperceptible nod. That was all she needed. She moved forward, kneeling beside the mound, lifting loose boards to reveal a small hollow, just enough for her to crawl in. Darkness pressed in, but it felt safer than standing out in the open, waiting for the ranch hands to return. He dropped a blanket beside her, nothing said, only gesture and glance. She wrapped it around herself, shivering, overwhelmed. Thank you, she said, voice hoarse. He didn't answer, only studied her with quiet, steady eyes. The first time she felt seen in days. Outside, the ranch settled into uneasy silence. The man lingered by the fence, muttering curses, restless. She watched him from the hollow, stomach still empty, but heart slightly lighter. Do you ever speak? She asked the scout, unsure if he would answer. He finally spoke, low, deliberate. Sometimes. His voice was a soft gravel, almost swallowed by the wind. She nodded, unsure what to say. Silence stretched between them, but it was not empty. It felt protective, a strange kind of safety she hadn't known in a long time. She curled into the blanket, listening to the distant shouts of cattle and the whisper of wind through broken boards. For the first time in days, she didn't feel completely alone. The moon shifted behind clouds, shadows creeping across the dirt. The scout stood, brushing dust from his hands. "We'll need food soon," he said finally. Not a question, not a suggestion. Just fact. She nodded, stomach twisting, knowing he was right. The hollow was a temporary reprieve, not a solution. She would need to move, to act, to survive. Her eyes flicked to him, searching for reassurance. He only nodded, almost imperceptibly, a slow, measured motion. She understood. She would not be left to fend for herself, at least not while he was here. For now, that was enough. The ranch beyond the fence was quiet again, but tension lingered like smoke. The scout crouched beside her again, scanning the perimeter. Her fingers dug into the blanket, seeking warmth she could not summon. "I'm not a burden," she said, more to herself. "I won't be." He glanced at her once, the shadow of a smile, or was it an understanding, passing briefly across his face. Then he returned to the shadows, silent sentinel, watching the fence line and the sleeping barn beyond. She curled into herself, listening to his quiet breath and the rhythm of the night, feeling something fragile take root, a sense of possibility, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she could survive one more day. The widow waited in the hollow as the moon dipped behind thick clouds. Her stomach ached, gnawing at her ribs, but fear had sharpened her senses more than hunger ever could. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot, every rustle of the wind a warning. She pressed her cheek against the rough wood, listening. Somewhere beyond the fence, the ranch breathed in deep, steady pulses, a sleeping giant. And in the darkness, the scout moved like a shadow that belonged to the land. Silent, deliberate, eyes flicking to every ridge and mound. "I shouldn't have come," she whispered, voice trembling. "I knew they'd see me." He didn't answer. He only crouched lower, scanning the open ground, waiting. The air between them held a quiet charge, like a wire strung too tight. She could feel his presence before she could see it clearly, watching, patient, but ready. The night smelled of dust and sweat and distant wood smoke. She shifted slightly, and the blanket rustled. His head snapped toward her, eyes dark in the gloom. "Shoo," he murmured. Just one word, barely a sound, but it carried authority. She froze. Her stomach growled. She pressed her hand to it, hoping the sound didn't carry. He crouched lower again, moving toward the tree line, then paused and glanced back at her. A nod. She swallowed, heart hammering, and followed, stepping softly over roots and stones. The shadows were thick, hiding the shape of the land, but he moved with surety, like he had walked this path 100 times. She stumbled once, almost losing balance. He was there instantly, a hand steadying her shoulder. "Careful," he said, low and sharp. "Don't make noise." She nodded, biting her lip, feeling both terrified and oddly protected. They reached a small hollow near the creek, water glinting in streaks of silver under the broken moonlight. He crouched, motioning for her to follow. She looked at him, hesitant. "Are you going to leave me here?" He didn't answer. He only tapped the ground beside him, silent command. She lowered herself carefully, knees scraping dirt. Her pulse pounded. The water's trickle was the only sound besides their quiet breathing. She shivered, the night chill seeping through her thin clothes. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. He tilted his head, gaze sweeping the darkness, assessing danger she could not even name. "Because no one else will," he finally said, voice rough but controlled. She blinked. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I don't even know your name." He gave a faint shrug, but his eyes stayed fixed on the shadows beyond the creek. "Names aren't important," he said. "Survival is." She nodded, swallowing hard. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't kindness. It was promise. A snapping branch made her jump. He didn't flinch. He only shifted slightly, silently readying himself. "Who's there?" she hissed, barely audible. His hand rose, palm outward. "Quiet. Wait." They crouched together, bodies pressed low, listening. Nothing. Just the wind twisting through the dead grass. She exhaled slowly, tension coiling out of her muscles. He finally relaxed a fraction, but eyes never leaving the tree line. She could feel the weight of his vigilance, the stillness like a shield. "Do you trust me?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer with words. He only nodded once, small but firm. That was enough. She shifted, moving closer to the hollowed bank, leaning against him slightly for warmth. Silence settled again, heavy and watchful, and the world beyond the creek seemed both distant and dangerous. She realized she could hear her own heart thumping, a reminder that she was alive, that she was still being protected. Hours passed. She lost count. Her body ached from cold and hunger, but he didn't stir except to move his gaze across the horizon. When the first faint light of dawn touched the distant hills, he finally spoke. "We move before they wake," he said, voice soft now, almost a whisper. She nodded, muscles stiff, but she followed. The path back to the fence line was familiar now, marked by shadows and moonlight. The air carried the faint scent of the ranch, and somewhere far off, a dog barked, warning of early risers. He didn't flinch. He only kept moving, slow, sure, every step measured. They reached the edge of the broken fence. She paused, looking back at the hollow near the creek. "Will they find me if I stay here?" she asked. He shook his head once, gaze sharp. "Not if you're careful. But this isn't safe. Not yet." Her stomach twisted at the thought of going back, of facing hungry hands and angry voices. But the thought of staying with him, under his watch, gave her a fragile spark of hope. It was not comfort. It was survival. That was enough. He pointed to a gap in the fence. Silent gesture. She moved toward it, knees trembling, heart thundering. He followed, staying just behind her, a shadow among shadows. The ranch was quiet now, but she could feel its presence pressing at the edges of the night. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He was there. That was enough for now. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe, like maybe she could last until the sun fully rose. And that, in the silence of the shadows, felt like everything. The hollow beneath the creek bank smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves. She pressed herself against the low wall of dirt, shivering as cold seeped through her thin shawl. The scout crouched beside her, silent, watching the tree line for any movement. His presence was steady, like a shadow fused to the land. She swallowed, her stomach aching, but her eyes were drawn to him, searching for some sign of intent. You don't talk much," she whispered. No reply. Only a tilt of the head, a careful glance that told her he had heard. That was enough. He reached into his worn satchel and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. He placed it in front of her with a motion that demanded nothing, offered everything. She hesitated. "Is that for me?" Her voice trembled. He nodded once, sharply. She unwrapped it. Stale bread, hard cheese, a bit of dried meat. It wasn't much, but it was food, and for the first time in days, she felt warmth of hope flicker inside her chest. She tore a piece of bread and held it in her hands, hesitating, watching him for any sign of deceit. There was none. Just the quiet certainty in his eyes, dark and unreadable, but protective. "I don't know how to repay you," she said, nibbling the bread. The scout didn't answer. He only crouched lower, shifting his weight, fingers brushing the dirt as if marking territory or reading some invisible map. The silence stretched, but it was not empty. It was a quiet conversation without words, a negotiation of trust. She swallowed the last bite, heart hammering, and looked at him again. "I don't even know your name." He shook his head. "Names aren't needed here." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She tried to smile, but it faltered. "Then, why me? Why not leave me out there?" He finally looked directly at her, eyes locking hers with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "Because no one else would." The hollow was cold, shadows pressing in from every corner, but for the first time, she felt some semblance of safety. "I won't be trouble," she said. I can do something." He tilted his head, watching her closely. She shifted, brushing dirt from her knees. "Anything. I'll fetch water, firewood." His eyes flicked toward the creek, then back to her, unspoken approval in the slow nod he gave. She exhaled slowly. She had survived this far by hiding, by moving, by shrinking. But now, with him, it felt different. She could exist without constant fear, at least for this night. A distant owl hooted, breaking the tension for a moment. She glanced toward the fence, toward the ranch, imagining the men waking, noticing her absence. Fear prickled her skin. He noticed it, of course. His hand lifted, motioning to her to stay low. She obeyed instantly, pressing herself closer to the earth. He was always there, a shadow at the edges of her vision, vigilant, patient, immovable. It was strange, almost comforting. She wasn't used to being watched without malice. She wasn't used to trust. She tried to speak again, voice barely above a whisper. What happens if they find me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed to the hollow beside the bank, the small gap between the roots and dirt. "Stay," he said finally, low and firm. That was all. "Stay." She nodded, curling her thin body tighter against the cold. His eyes never left the tree line. He didn't speak again, only shifted slightly, silent sentinel. She watched him, noticing the way his fingers tapped lightly against the dirt, the way his eyes moved with precision. Every movement measured, deliberate. Safe. Hours passed, and the first hints of dawn touched the distant hills. Shadows retreated slowly, and the hollow became less ominous. She dared to breathe more freely. He stood finally, stretching, then crouched to meet her gaze. "We will need to move soon," he said, almost casually, but the words carried weight. She nodded, stomach still twisting with hunger, heart still racing with fear. She trusted him now, in a way that startled her. She had survived by herself, but she realized she didn't want to anymore. Survival was easier with him here, silent, unyielding, protective. For the first time in days, she let herself hope. Not for safety forever. Not for miracles. Just for now. Just for this moment of quiet warmth and shelter beside a man who didn't speak much but whose presence alone kept the darkness at bay. And in that hollow by the creek, she believed she could last another day. The hollow smelled of damp earth and old leaves, but it was quiet now. The creek's water trickled softly, and the first faint light of morning filtered through the tangled roots above. She sat against the dirt wall, knees pulled to her chest, the thin blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. She could hear him shift beside her, silent, always watching the edges of the world. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat. Words had been heavy for her lately, but now they spilled out before she could stop them. I lost everything," she whispered, voice barely audible. "My husband, my home, my children's laughter." She paused, eyes fixed on the ground, imagining the ashes in the empty rooms. He didn't respond at first. His gaze stayed sharp on the horizon, but she could feel it like a weight pressing against her, steady and unyielding. Who did this to you?" she asked, voice cracking. No answer. Only the faint sound of his hand brushing against dirt, restless, alert. "I don't know if anyone remembers us," she said softly. "Our names, they've erased them from this land." Her chest tightened. She could feel the tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. She wasn't used to anyone listening. And yet, somehow, his silence felt heavier than words. "I didn't know if I'd live to see another sunrise," she said, voice trembling. "They burned everything, fields, letters, my father's things, gone. Like I never existed." A pause. She inhaled sharply, forcing control back into her voice. I ran until I couldn't anymore." She glanced at him, and for a moment, his dark eyes met hers, unblinking. You see me?" she asked quietly. He gave a slow nod, deliberate, almost a promise. That was enough. Names, she whispered again, trying to anchor herself. They tried to take everything, but I remember. My children, my husband. I remember them. Her fingers dug into the dirt, clutching the earth as if she could hold on to it. Her voice faltered. She swallowed hard, staring at the creek. They left me nothing but hunger. He shifted slightly, moving closer, but not speaking. Not judging. Simply present. She realized she could speak freely here, unafraid, and the weight of her past seemed slightly lighter because someone carried a part of it now, silently. They thought I'd vanish. Thought I'd beg and die by the roadside and no one would notice, she continued. I thought, maybe I would. But then, she glanced toward him, unsure why, but words spilled faster than her control. I found you. You were there. Watching. Not like them. Not like anyone else. I could trust, just a little. He didn't speak. Only shifted, still a shadow in the half-light, still a presence steady as stone. She could feel the tension in his body ease just slightly, a recognition of her words. I carry it all with me, she said finally, voice breaking. The hunger, the fear, the fire, the ashes, my father's letters, burned to pieces. She pressed her palm to the dirt, imagining the charred pages, fragile memories scattered in smoke. They think I am nothing. But I am here. I remember. Her shoulders shook slightly. I won't forget. I can't forget. She looked at him. Will you remember too? He didn't answer with words. He only lowered his head, eyes meeting hers for a fraction of a second, and that was enough. A crow called in the distance. The sound sliced through the morning calm, sharp and insistent. She jumped slightly, gripping the blanket tighter. He shifted closer, resting a hand near hers, not touching, only presence. I've learned to move silently, she said. To hide, to survive, but it doesn't take away the pain. It only buries it deeper. She swallowed hard, staring at the creek. And some days, it comes back anyway. Like a ghost. He remained still, watching the distant tree line, but she could feel the weight of his gaze anchoring her, steadying her. I never wanted to leave them, she whispered finally. I didn't want to abandon the children, the home, but I had no choice. Her voice was raw, trembling. Everything I loved was taken. A pause. Her eyes filled with tears, but she refused to blink. Do you understand loss? She asked, voice fragile. He didn't answer immediately. Slowly, his hand brushed against hers, just a whisper of contact. Not warmth, not comfort, just acknowledgement. Enough. She nodded, silently grateful. She realized that in this hollow, in this moment, the burden of memory could exist alongside protection. The creek gurgled quietly. Dawn spilled over the hills. She pressed her forehead to her knees, breathing in the chill morning air. The scout remained, silent, watching, patient. She whispered again, almost to herself. Thank you, for letting me speak. For letting me exist here, even if just for now. His only response was the faintest tilt of his head, dark eyes unreadable but steady, like a promise, you will not face this alone. The morning sun crept over the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch. The widow crouched low in the hollow, blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, stomach still aching. She listened to the distant clatter of boots and the creak of wagon wheels, every sound sharp in the quiet dawn. The scout stood near the edge of the creek, eyes scanning the fields and fences, posture rigid, alert. They'll know soon, he murmured, low and steady. She swallowed hard. Know what? His dark eyes didn't leave the horizon. That someone's here. From the barn, the foreman emerged, squinting against the light. He adjusted his hat and spat into the dirt. The girl's been seen. I told you she'd come back, he said, voice tight with irritation. Another man, younger, stepped forward, eyes darting toward the tree line. Should we chase her off? The foreman shook his head, jaw tight. Not yet. Let's see what she's after. If she's hungry, she won't last long. If she's trouble, we'll deal with it. They moved slowly, voices low, but the widow heard everything, heart hammering. She pressed herself against the dirt, knees to her chest. They're coming," she whispered. He crouched beside her, fingers brushing lightly over her shoulder, a small gesture that said, "I've got you." "They are. But they won't touch you, not while I'm here," he said, voice firm. She nodded, swallowing the fear that twisted her stomach. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to that thread of safety, but the reality pressed close, sharp and unyielding. The foreman's shadow stretched long across the field. He stopped at the edge of the fence, scanning, muttering under his breath. "I know she's here somewhere, hiding like a rat." He waved his hand at the others. "Split up. Find her." The younger man hesitated. "Boss, it's just a woman." The foreman's laugh was dry, harsh. "A woman? Maybe. But she shouldn't be here. None of them should be." The scout shifted slightly, barely a whisper of movement, but enough to make the widow's pulse spike. He was ready. Silent, patient, deadly in his stillness. The widow bit her lip. We can't fight them," she whispered. His hand brushed hers again. "Not yet. We wait. Watch. Survive." The words were simple, but they carried authority, and she obeyed instinctively. From the edge of the barn, one of the ranch hands moved closer to the fence. She froze, holding her breath. The scout's hand moved, pointing silently toward the hollow. She ducked lower, pressed into the dirt, heart thundering. The man passed without noticing. Relief washed over her briefly, but it was fragile, fleeting. "They're desperate," she said, voice barely audible. "Hungry for control. For everything." He didn't answer. Only shifted, eyes narrow, scanning the horizon, alert for any sign of movement. She realized then that she could speak freely here, could admit fear, could whisper truths she wouldn't dare voice elsewhere. "They burned my home, my letters, my family," the words tumbled out, rough and jagged. He shifted slightly, placing a hand over hers, a silent acknowledgement. That was enough. She was not alone in the weight of memory. The foreman's voice carried again, sharp and commanding. "Check the creek line. She can't hide forever. Someone will see her." A horse whinnied nearby. The scout's eyes flicked toward it, body coiling just slightly. "They think the land belongs to them," the widow whispered, voice low, trembling. "Everything, every inch." He nodded once. "They're wrong. But they won't see it until it's too late." The words were soft, quiet, but they carried a promise that unsettled her. Hours passed with tense waiting. The men moved in measured sweeps across the fields, voices muttering, boots crunching over dry earth. The widow pressed herself lower each time she heard a shift in their patrol, heartbeat loud in her ears. The scout remained a shadow at her side, steady, unyielding, a silent shield against the power that encroached. She realized she had come to rely on his presence, fragile as it was, and the thought made her chest ache with something like hope. Finally, the foreman's voice faded. He and the younger men disappeared over the far rise, muttering and cursing under their breath. The widow exhaled slowly, tension bleeding from her body in a long shudder. The scout watched them go, then turned his gaze back to her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The hollow was quiet now, and for the first time that morning, she allowed herself to relax slightly. Not completely, not yet. But enough to trust, just a little. She clutched the thin blanket tighter, pressed against the earth, and whispered, "Thank you, for staying." He finally spoke, low and deliberate. "Always." She let the words sink in. Outside, the ranch resumed its rhythm, unaware that someone had survived another morning under their shadow. She pressed her face against her knees, listening to the faint trickle of the creek, the soft wind through broken boards, and the quiet strength of the man who had chosen to stand with her. In that hollow, beneath the rising sun, she realized that survival wasn't just about hiding. It was about trust, about patience, about waiting for the right moment to act. And for now, they had both. The sun was higher now, burning down on dry grass and cracked earth. The hollow beside the creek offered little shade, but the scout stayed close, scanning the distant fence line. The widow's stomach still gnawed at her, but fear had sharpened her senses more than hunger ever could. A rustle in the brush made her stiffen. She pressed herself against the dirt, eyes wide. "Something's coming," she whispered. The scout didn't answer. He only raised a hand, palm outward, fingers tense. They crouched together, listening. A dog barked somewhere far off. Then, the sound of hooves, fast, uneven, clattering over rocks. A man appeared at the edge of the hollow, rifle raised. "Hey! You there! Out here!" The widow froze. The scout's hand moved, fingers brushing hers, a silent command. "Move," he said low, almost a growl. She nodded, heart hammering. He stepped forward first, calm, controlled, every motion precise. She followed, crouching low, moving behind him. The man raised his rifle. "I said, stop." The scout didn't flinch. He gestured sharply, silent. The widow swallowed, then acted. She grabbed a fallen branch and swung it, knocking the rifle slightly off course. The man cursed, stepping back. The scout moved like a shadow, rifle leveled, steady. "Go," he hissed. She dove low, rolling to the side, grabbing another stick. Her hands shook, but she swung again, hard, catching the man off guard. He stumbled, shouting, off balance. The scout advanced, calm and lethal in silence. He didn't shoot immediately. He waited, watched, letting the man make mistakes. "Stop," the man yelled again. The widow's heart pounded, adrenaline surging through her veins. I can do this," she whispered. The scout didn't reply. He only nodded slightly, a fraction of encouragement, eyes locked on the intruder. She gritted her teeth and lunged forward, blocking another swing at her. The man cursed, lunging toward her recklessly. She sidestepped, using his momentum to push him into the dirt. "Good," the scout said finally, voice low, approving, calm. She barely heard it over her own rapid breathing, but it settled something in her chest. She looked at him, wide-eyed. I did it." He nodded again, slow and deliberate. "You're not like them," he said. "You survive." The man on the ground scrambled, cursing and backing away, realizing the fight was over. He ran toward the fence, leaving the hollow and creek behind. The widow dropped to her knees, hands on the dirt, chest heaving. I didn't think I could," she said, voice trembling. The scout crouched beside her, brushing dirt from his hands. "You can," he said simply. "If you have to." She looked at him, searching for more, but there was no more. His eyes were calm, unreadable, steady. That was all the instruction she needed. A crow called from the trees above. She shivered, wrapping the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. Do I always have to fight?" she asked quietly. He shook his head slightly. "Not always. But you have to be ready." She nodded, swallowing hard, realizing that readiness was not just about defending herself. It was about trusting him, moving with him, listening. About surviving together. The creek gurgled softly as they settled again beside the hollow. She traced a finger through the dirt, imagining the intruder gone, the threat past for now. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't answer. He only glanced at the horizon, vigilant, silent, a sentinel she could rely on. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the grass, but she no longer felt completely exposed. She had fought. She had survived. And for the first time, she believed she could face what came next. Hours passed. They stayed low, hidden, scanning the field. The ranch beyond the fence seemed quiet, but tension lingered. She pressed herself closer to the scout's side, feeling a fragile spark of confidence. I can learn," she said, voice soft but certain. He glanced at her, dark eyes measuring, then gave a slow nod. That was enough. He didn't promise safety. He didn't promise comfort. Only survival. And now, she could believe she was ready to earn it. The day stretched on, heavy with heat and quiet. She kept watch beside him, muscles tight, senses alert. Every snap of a twig, every shift of the breeze, every distant bark reminded her that danger existed, but she no longer felt paralyzed. She had tested herself. She had acted. And in that hollow beside the creek, she realized something: she was not helpless. She could survive. She could fight. She could endure. And with him by her side, silent, steady, she believed she might even thrive. Smoke drifted across the hills before she even saw the flames. She woke to the smell first, acrid and sharp, clawing at her throat. "Fire," she whispered, voice trembling. The scout was already moving, a shadow through the low light, eyes scanning the horizon. "Stay low," he said quietly, hand on her shoulder, steadying her. She nodded, heart hammering. The hollow felt smaller suddenly, pressed in by the weight of heat and smoke curling through the trees. They crouched together as the fire spread across a distant barn, flames licking the sky. The crackle carried on the wind, the smell of burning wood and hay thick and choking. She pressed her face into her knees. "My home," she whispered, tears threatening. "Everything, gone." He didn't answer immediately. He only shifted, scanning the edges of the blaze, alert for movement, for danger. His silence was steady, almost protective, and she clung to it, shaky and desperate. Do they know we're here?" she asked, voice low. He shook his head slightly. "Not yet. But they'll smell smoke. They'll come." Her stomach twisted. Why burn another barn?" He didn't answer with words. Only a tilt of his head toward the smoke, a gesture heavy with warning. She understood. Not just fire, not just destruction, it was a message. A threat. They wanted to remind anyone who survived that the land was theirs. The wind shifted, carrying embers across the dry grass. She flinched. It could reach us," she said. "We'll be gone before then," he replied, low, steady, eyes never leaving the horizon. Her hands dug into the dirt. Her fingers ached. I can't lose again," she whispered, voice breaking. "Not like last time." He didn't speak. He only rested a hand lightly near hers, presence more than comfort, a warning and a shield both. She nodded, swallowing hard, clinging to that fragile tether. From the direction of the ranch, a shout rang out. "Fire! Somebody stop it!" The foreman's voice, harsh and panicked. "Get water! Damn it, get water!" She felt her chest tighten. This was chaos now, not just threat. And somewhere in that chaos, she felt her own past pressing in, memories of ashes and loss she had buried deep. "It's happening again," she whispered. The scout's hand brushed hers again. "Stay low. Watch. Survive." She nodded, teeth clenched. Survival was all that mattered. The flames rose higher, orange and hungry against the darkening sky. Shadows danced across the trees, twisting and grotesque, reminding her of every fear she had ever carried. "I can't," she said, voice faltering. "I can't face it all." His eyes met hers for a long moment. "You can," he said, low but firm. "Because you've done it before. You'll do it again." She swallowed hard, feeling the truth of it sting her throat. He didn't promise safety. He didn't promise peace. Only survival. That was enough. They moved slowly, keeping low to the ground as the fire spread across the field, smoke curling around them in thick ribbons. She stumbled once, coughing, and he caught her, steadying her with a hand on her shoulder. I can't," she whispered again. "Yes, you can," he said, voice quiet, eyes scanning the edge of the flames. She nodded, gripping the dirt, forcing herself to move. Every step was a test of courage, a reminder that the world was cruel and fire could take everything in an instant. Hours passed, the fire finally burning down in distant embers. The ranch beyond was chaotic, men shouting, hauling buckets, panicked and angry. The widow pressed herself against the earth, heart hammering, tears streaked across her face. I survived, she whispered, almost disbelief in her own voice. The scout crouched beside her, silent but present, watching, steady, unyielding. For now, he said finally. The words were simple, cold, and yet grounding. They had survived another night, another test, and she realized that survival was not just avoiding fire or danger. It was endurance, strength, patience. And she had all three, at least enough to last. Smoke lingered in the hollows and hills long after the flames died down. The widow pressed her hands over her knees, shivering, exhausted but alive. The scout remained, vigilant, eyes on the horizon, silent sentinel of what had passed and what would come. "We'll need to move," he said finally, voice soft but firm. She nodded, swallowing, realizing that nothing had changed except that she had proven herself. They had endured together, fire and fear pressing at them, and she had survived. That was enough for now. The hollow smelled of damp earth and ash from the fire. She dug at the dirt near a fallen tree root, hands raw and trembling. There has to be something here," she whispered. The scout crouched beside her, silent, eyes scanning the horizon. "What are you looking for?" he asked finally, voice low. "Something my father left, something he wanted me to find if everything went wrong." Her hand scraped away soil, revealing a small, rusted tin box. She brushed it clean and pried it open. Inside, folded letters tied with a faded ribbon. Her fingers shook as she lifted the first one. "I thought they'd be gone forever," she murmured, voice thick. The ink was smudged, pages fragile, words from a life she barely remembered. He tried to warn us. Tried to tell us who could be trusted." She swallowed hard, curling the letters to her chest. The scout watched quietly, letting her unfold the past without interruption. "What does it say?" he asked finally. She hesitated. "Everything I never knew, everything they hid from me." Her eyes scanned the pages, reading lines of betrayal, land disputes, and family feuds carried over generations. Her stomach twisted. They lied. They took it all. They killed everything we loved, and made it look like luck or misfortune. She pressed her forehead to the letters. All the names, all the promises, gone. The scout's dark eyes followed her every movement. He didn't speak, only shifted slightly, presence steady, grounding her. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, burning hot, but refused to wipe it away. "I always wondered why we were left, why they came for us," she whispered. "Now I know. It wasn't just the fire, or hunger, or chance. It was the families. The ranch. The land. The power. They wanted us gone, erased." Her voice cracked, trembling under the weight of truth. The scout crouched lower, brushing dirt from his hands. "And you survived," he said, voice low, deliberate. "That matters." She looked at him, eyes wide, swallowing back a sob. "I survived, but now I know why." She read another letter, shaking. Names she recognized from the ranch, names of men she had feared and avoided, scribbled in her father's careful hand. They wanted it all. The land, the cattle, the control. They made sure no one remembered us. She glanced at the scout. Do they know I found this?" He shook his head once, slow and deliberate. "Not yet. But they will." The words were quiet, heavy, a reminder that survival was not enough. Knowledge brought danger too. Her hands trembled as she replaced the letters in the tin, tying the ribbon loosely. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted, voice hoarse. He didn't answer. He only nodded slightly, eyes sharp, scanning the hollow and the distant hills. She realized that he was waiting, letting her decide, guiding silently without telling her what to do. She took a deep breath. Maybe we use it. Maybe it's not just memory. Maybe it's leverage." He tilted his head slightly, acknowledging the thought without judgment. The sun climbed higher, shadows retreating, light falling across broken branches and scorched earth. She pressed the tin against her chest, feeling the weight of generations, of betrayal, of fire and hunger. "They thought they could erase us," she whispered. "But they didn't erase me. I'm still here." He crouched beside her, eyes still scanning, hands resting lightly on the dirt. "And you'll keep being here," he said quietly. "No one else decides that." She nodded, swallowing, feeling strength harden in her chest. The past was heavy, but it didn't break her. It sharpened her, gave her focus. She glanced at the scout, shadow among shadows, sentinel of this hollow, witness to her discovery. "We move soon," he said finally. She nodded. The letters were safe. She was not alone. And for the first time since the fire, she felt like she could face what came next. The hollow felt smaller now, cramped by the weight of morning light and the quiet hum of distant activity. She crouched beside the scout, fingers brushing dirt and ash as though grounding herself to the earth. "Do you really trust me?" she whispered, voice low, hesitant. He didn't answer immediately. His dark eyes scanned the far horizon, noting every movement in the fields, the fences, the shadowed corners of the ranch. Finally, he looked at her, expression unreadable. "I trust you to survive," he said. "That's enough for now." She swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly. "It's not just survival," she said. I need to know if I can rely on you, if you'll stay." He didn't shift. Only nodded once, deliberate, steady. "I'll stay," he said finally, voice low, almost a whisper. That was enough. She let herself breathe, fingers pressing into the earth. "And you trust me with this," she said, glancing at the small tin of letters tucked into her lap. "Yes," he replied. "But trust is earned. Not given. Watch the men. Listen. Move carefully. That's how you earn it." The distant foreman's voice rose across the fields, harsh and commanding. "Search the hollows. Check the creek line. She can't hide forever." The widow's pulse spiked. She pressed herself lower. "They're moving," she whispered. The scout's hand brushed hers, steadying, a silent signal. "Not for long. We act before they know we've found anything." She nodded, stomach twisting with fear and adrenaline. Her fingers tightened on the tin. She realized then that trust wasn't just a word, it was action, vigilance, and shared risk. A rustle of boots in the brush made her flinch. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. He crouched slightly, eyes narrowing. "Yes." "Stay quiet." They watched as two ranch hands approached, carrying buckets and murmuring to each other. She swallowed, heart hammering. "Should I?" He shook his head slightly. "No. Watch. Learn. Move only when I do." She pressed herself into the shadow of the hollow, breath caught in her throat. Every second stretched, every movement measured. The men passed by without noticing them, voices fading with each step. Relief washed over her in fragile waves. "You see," he whispered finally, voice almost lost in the wind. "You stayed alive. You acted." She nodded, trembling. "But I want to do more. I can't just hide." He studied her, expression shadowed, unreadable. "Then you'll act when it matters. Not now. But soon. You'll know." She pressed her lips together, swallowing hard. The first taste of control, of agency, tingled across her nerves. She had survived the fire, the threats, the hunger. She had endured. Now she could begin to shape what came next. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke and dust from the distant barns. Her stomach knotted. "They're desperate," she whispered. "Hungry for control, for vengeance." The scout's eyes flicked toward the rising sun, shadows stretching across the ground. "Yes. But desperation is predictable. Watch for it. We move when they're unbalanced." She pressed the tin against her chest, weight grounding her. Knowledge was leverage, trust was protection, and together they were something stronger than fear. Minutes passed in tense stillness. Every sound carried potential threat. Every shadow flickered with imagined danger. She pressed closer to the scout, shoulders brushing, heart thundering. I I think I understand now, she said softly. Survival isn't enough. It's strategy, patience, trust. He gave a faint nod. Exactly. The hollow seemed smaller, yet safer, the weight of shared presence pressing against the chaos of the world outside. The distant foreman barked another order, frustration bleeding through his voice. She pressed herself lower, hand brushing the tin again. I'll stay ready, she whispered. I'll watch. I'll move with you. He glanced at her, dark eyes steady, and finally allowed a small, almost imperceptible nod. That acknowledgement was everything. She could rely on him, and he could rely on her. For now, the balance of power had shifted, fragile but present, like the dawn spilling light across the field. The creek gurgled softly nearby, the wind stirred the ash, and the widow realized that trust was not just words. It was preparation, presence, and patience. And in that hollow, beside a silent sentinel, she understood that she was ready. Ready to act. Ready to survive. Ready to reclaim the pieces of a world that had been stolen from her. And for the first time in a long while, she felt not just alive, but empowered.